Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to log on and attend this morning's webinar. My name is Emily Cornelius, and I am the Marketing and Communications Coordinator here at Vigorate. And just before I pass the webinar over to today's presenter, I want to remind everyone that if at any time throughout the webinar you have any questions, you can type them in using your GoToWebinar question box on the side of your screen, or you can tweet us at Vigorate Digital. Don't forget the demonstrate webinar hashtag. So we'll be answering questions at the end of the webinar. Any questions we don't get to during the webinar, we'll answer on our LinkedIn page later today. So before we get to Rick, I just want to briefly mention our next webinar in the Demonstrate series. It'll take place on September 25th at 11 a.m. We'll be welcoming Jennifer Ballog, Vigorate's own Senior Director in Account Management and Strategy. Jennifer has been with Vigorate over 7 years now, providing direct clients and agency expertise as it relates to online marketing and strategy. And Jen will be covering why email still needs to be a major focus for digital marketers, the integration of email and social, personalization, reporting, and testing. So for more information about this upcoming webinar, you can register for our Demonstrate webinar notifications on our website at vigoratedigital.com. So today's speaker is Rick McLaughlin. Rick is a celebrated and multi-award winning Toronto-based creative technologist. He has worked on both traditional and integrated marketing programs for a range of industries. Rick has held numerous senior roles as creative director, managing director, strategist, designer, marketer, teacher, public speaker, and is a key member of various executive teams. Some of the many organizations that Rick has worked with include Coors Light, Grand & Toy, LG, Jack Daniels, TD Canada Trust, Motorola, and Live Nation. So without further ado, I will pass the webinar over to Rick's capable hands. Rick?
Where's the mouse? Oh, right there. Good morning, everyone. This is Rick speaking. Today, actually, I want to just kind of give us just a brief overview of what we're going to discuss today. And I'm going to do this. There we go. And today what we're going to do is we're going to cover a little bit of history with terms of responsive design and just kind of the web overall, just to kind of put things into a context for us. We're going to definitely review some points to ponder. This is food for thought for all of us as a reminder of kind of where we came from and, my goodness, where we are and where we're going to be going. Definitely ask questions. If you have questions throughout, please, within the interface, just, text them over to Emily and she'll ask. And not a problem. Interruptions are fine. Otherwise, we'll answer a bunch of questions at the end as well. We're going to look at what RWD is versus AWD. And it's not rear wheel drive versus all wheel drive. And I'll explain in a few minutes what that is. Things to consider, definitely, finally, and then answer some questions. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Where it all began, for some, I don't need to really remind those, for some of us that were around in 95 when Windows 95 came out and wonderfully replaced Windows 3.1, and they had this wonderful thing called Internet Explorer, a browser that replaced and actually was a complement to Netscape at the time and was in terms of being able to surf this thing called the Internet or the international, what was it? Not the International Highway, Emily, what was it again?
I got nothing for you.
You got nothing for me. Information Highway. That's it is. But what's interesting is that was in 1995 is when the first browser was launched. But in 1996, Nokia came out with what was called the 9000 communicator. This was the first web-friendly handset in the market. In other words, it was an internet or web-based enabled phone. So smartphones have been around actually for a lot of years. That being said, though, the huge influx of them has only been probably in the last 5 to 7 years. So since 1996, the number of active smartphone users has topped 1 billion people. Now, that's taken us almost 17, 18 years to get up to 1 billion people. The predictions are, though, that within the next 2 years, an additional 1 billion users will be added to the mix. By 2014, mobile internet, and this is a prediction that's been around for about a year and a half now, and it looks as though it's going to be coming true. It will likely take over desktop in terms of internet usage. Already more than 1/2 of all local searches are done on mobile devices, per a recent Google study. couple of other interesting stats to kind of set the stage here for today. 86% of adults own a mobile phone, and 53% of them use it to access the web. In 2011, 241 billion was generated via mobile transactions. The forecast by 2015 that number will go as high as $1 trillion. So people have spoken. They've spoken with their phones and with their clicks and with their thumbs. This is where they want to be. This is where they actually want to do transactions. Just an interesting statistic to kind of put things in context over just the last 12 months in terms of website traffic. Q1 of 2012, just a little over a year and a half ago, 88% was desktop, traditional. 5.9 or almost 6% was tablet, and a little over 5.5 or almost 5.5% was smartphone. In less than a year, it's now gone up to tablets of basically, oh, Emily, I forgot. I kept it as table. It should be tablet.
Tablet.
Tablet. Yes, there's a brand new device called the Table that we're going to launch. It's huge. It really is. So tablets has actually gone up to 11%, and interestingly enough, smartphone usage has doubled to almost 11%, and the trend is only going to continue. Interesting, and for most of us, this will seem well obvious that in terms of the usage and the device preference throughout the day, it makes sense. From 12 a.m. to 7 a.m., it's mobile, and it's everything from the late night all the way through to the early morning commute. From the early morning, from 7 till 10, it transitions from the mobile device over to the desktop, which makes most sense. Most of us are still sitting at desktops throughout the day working, so that takes us from 10 till 5. Very quickly, though, from 5 o'clock till 8 o'clock, tablet becomes hugely popular. And then between 8 and 12 a.m., it's a combination of both smartphone and tablets, kind of supersede any PC usage. So once again, a reminder that, in many cases, these are the devices, particular tablets. While there were certainly tablets prior to the iPad is the 800-pound gorilla, along with the iPhone and all the Android-based devices. They have taken over in terms of people's use, and part of it's portability and accessibility as well. An interesting number, and for everyone involved, 86% of mobile internet users are using their devices while watching television. And just pause for a moment and ask ourselves, when's the last time you sat down to actually watch evening show and not had your cell phone or had your smartphone next to you? For some of us, it's picking up, emails that are coming through late at night. At other times, it's just researching and looking at information that we've discovered while watching the television. It could be a TV spot, it could be something within the actual show that we're watching, and instantly picking it up. And the use of everything from SMS messaging to voting on in terms of some of the TV shows. So it's people have the device with them and they're using it. This will have implications in a few minutes when we go into some practical issues and practical ways of leveraging this. 79% of people will quickly leave a website due to poor performance, especially when viewing a non-responsive website on a smartphone. I'll predict and I'll say the days of Flash in terms of Flash-based websites, are pretty much done. They're over. Some would disagree with me, but I really believe that since the advent of the iOS, in particular the iPhone and the iPad, in terms of its just huge penetration and usage and its lack of support of Flash, has means that many sites that are Flash-based are rendered basically unusable for most people. Simultaneous to that, many websites nowadays are fixed width, which means when you search on when you're viewing them on a smartphone, you're instantly cropping off, in some cases, up to 90% of the actual site. And people are tired of having to pinch and squeeze and rotate and try to actually, navigate a site that was not optimized for their mobile device. Something we need to definitely address. This was an interesting study by Morgan Stanley. Found that 91% of all smartphone users have their phones within an arm's reach, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. An arm's reach. That means it's it's basically built in. So they're not just ubiquitous in our society. Users have gradually become dependent upon the devices. And I must admit, I'm one of them. My phone is with me all the time. In particular, given the app ecosystem that many of us leverage, even though in the app ecosystem, in my case, I run an Apple iPhone, I would say I probably only use 5% of the apps, but I use them all the time. The thing with this, though, with the accessibility of these devices and that people are basically have them on them all the time, what does it mean for us as marketers? Short answer is everything. There's no such thing as a wasted moment anymore. Each campaign or promotion is 24/7, 365 a day proposition. So once again, the consumers are right. They have told us when they want to be contacted, when they want to get information, and more importantly, how they actually want to access that information. And an interesting Google study that just came out as well, in terms of understanding the smartphone users, found that 9 out of 10 smartphone searches result in an action. So that's everything from purchasing to visiting a business and so on. So people are using their phones for an end. They want something, they're looking for something, they're driven by action. So what does that mean for us? Just in kind of summary, the majority of consumers have their smartphones by their side. They frequently search out companies on a whim. And that's been proven time and time again in terms of the search results, in particular in the evening hours, which leads to actionable results. They want to do something. That's why they're searching up your company. Downloading an app is not spontaneous. Searching on the web is. Downloading an app is a commitment. It's in particular in the purchase of an app. You're making a conscious decision to purchase something. So that the web is the first position in terms of finding information. And if there is then a specific app for that, either business or opportunity, then the consumer will decide if they actually want to add one more app to the thousands of apps already sitting on your device. But the web is always there. So your website is what they see. So with that in mind, we now need to take a look at how do we ensure that what they see is what we want them to see. So not all is good in Oz, as we would say. A couple of things that are the challenges of nowadays. Device fragmentation. Last year, there was a little over 4,000 distinct Android devices. This year, there'll be close to and probably exceeding 12,000 plus devices. What does that mean for us? That means a proliferation. That's a big word. I almost got that one. Did I say it right?
I think so.
Oh, I think okay.
I was impressed.
You were impressed? That's good. Proliferation, sure, of devices, in particular screen resolutions. So when you're trying, and it's impossible for any of us to be able to design a website that will look perfect in a fixed way on 12,000 plus devices each and every time. And it's only getting worse. For example, nowadays we have to consider that it's beyond the desktop in a large way. Everything from smart appliances to smart televisions to kind of in-vehicle searching and connected vehicles to now some of the upcoming stuff, which is many of us hope to hear in terms of the fall from Apple, but wearable devices and wearable systems. So all of this will have browser and internet-enabled connections. So how do we ensure that your website is actually going to be able to be displayed on these devices in the kind of the form, the function, and in particular the branding experience that you want to ensure that the customer ultimately has? Lots of our clients will say to us, "You've got to be kidding. I just finished launching our brand new non-flash data-driven site. Can't we just use an MDOT site in terms of a mobile specific site?" For those who may not be familiar with this was a trend a few years ago where, I would call it a stopgap kind of measure, it enabled an existing website that would have been fixed to actually provide a mobile optimized or enhanced view of things. Now, the challenge with those mobile and enhanced views was that, unfortunately, it was a very, very specific subset of your website. In many cases, truncated both in content, look, and feel. And while it was optimized, quote unquote, for in the early days, about 3-4 years ago, of a small smartphone based screen resolution, it actually totally ignored all the tablets, phablets, all the other devices, and all the other non kind of tablet and smartphone devices. It totally ignores all of them. In those cases, they would just be served up your regular static, old website, which does not look good at all. So unfortunately, we're not kidding. You need to rethink, even after the last couple of years of trying to get away from or refreshing your websites. A great quote that we hear all the time from customers: "My site looks fine on a mobile device." Well, As the infamous words of Steve Jobs have said, most people make the mistake of thinking design is what it looks like. It's not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. And this is incredibly important and a kind of a guiding principle for all of us that are using the web, which is pretty much everyone, in terms of marketing and communicating with our customers. Design is how it works. It's just not how it looks. So why make it any harder than necessary for your customers to get to your content ASAP? So what do we do? Well, this is the interesting part. So this brings us today to the conversation of responsive design. And I'm going to use the responsive design in a kind of an umbrella statement for right now. And then we're going to drill down into specifics over the next few slides. So the key nowadays is try not to make your website look the same on all the devices. For example, in many cases, the website, unless it's been optimized for your tablets and your small devices, it's going to truncate. It's going to cut off information. It's going to give a terrible user experience. So we have to be able to accommodate and recognize that people, by their purchase of smartphones and other devices, have said, this is how I want to interface with information and your brand, and it's up to us to deliver. So we need to let your site break. It needs to break itself. It needs to be able to shapeshift and be fluid based on the user's device and the way in which they want to interface with us. It needs to mold. It needs to mold to the different kinds of browsers and hardware that users and our customers have said, this is what I want. And it needs to conform. We need to conform to them. They will not be conforming to us. So let's make it responsive as an overall thing. Now, before we get into it, there's going to be a whole bunch of terms that lots of people throw out there. So I'm just going to go briefly over and not get into a huge technical discussion about the differences, but you're going to hear a bunch of buzzwords that are thrown out there. First and foremost is fixed. The other way to put this is the traditional website. It's got a fixed width, in some cases fixed heights. You can't, you'll notice that for many of us that actually have any kind of tablets or phones, in many cases, you can't zoom in, you can't pinch in, you can't do anything. It's fixed. So it has set widths and has a thing called no media queries. For non-technical people, what a media query basically is, it enables the website to do a quick communication with the device and say to the device, what are you? What can you support? And then try to serve up that information. Fixed or traditional websites, both HTML and I would argue Flash in particular as well, have none of those capabilities, at least in their normal way of putting them together. So everything is fixed, everything gets truncated. As the screen gets smaller, things get cut off. So it's made for one browser size and everything else is ignored. Next is fluid. So fluid uses a concept of relative widths, and it allows to expand and contract. But the catch with it, there's no media queries. So while it is a good kind of interim step, the problem is it still does isolate and it actually truncates smaller devices, and it doesn't allow for future proofing of your website. Adaptive. You're going to hear the word adaptive and responsive used interchangeably by a lot of people, but there are differences. An adaptive website uses a set or relative widths relative to the browser that's actually being used to view the content. So devices and resolution-driven media queries. So the site is smart enough to know, hey, you're a smartphone. I'm going to shuffle things around and present it in this format. Oh, you're a tablet? I'm going to shuffle it and present it this way. And then finally, responsive. So responsive uses what are called relative widths. So content and resolution are driven by media queries. So once again, the site is being proactive in the way in which it's displaying content and information to the user based on the user device. One thing to also remind ourselves is users have multiple devices. So we have to ensure that the experience, the brand experience, the communications that they have on the desktop during the day is carried over when they go home at night to continue their research, their information gathering on their smartphone or their tablet. So we're going to focus on two of the major trends, RWD versus AWD. Now, these are just short forms, but really what RWD stands for is responsive web design. So as we've discussed, a responsive web design will fluidly change and respond to any screen or device. And there's that word fluid. So you can see that these words and key and buzzwords are used interchangeably to describe even themselves. And AWD stands for Adaptive Web Design. So an adaptive design will change to fit a predetermined set of screens and devices. They're also called breakpoints. You'll find a number of websites nowadays that as you take your browser, you can be on your desktop and try this. As you take your browser, as you make your browser window narrower, smaller, at certain points, the overall layout of the website will snap to a particular look, and it will hold and constrain that until you make the screen even a little bit smaller. And there's usually 3 to 4 breakpoints based upon kind of industry standard widths: 1024, 768, 380, and similar. So responsive web design is flexible, it's fluid framework. So framework is an interesting word that we're going to discuss in a few minutes, and it adapts. Whereas adaptive is a predefined set of layouts. So when you're developing your website, you're going to determine that we're going to come up with the graphics, the content, the look and the feel for 4 very specific widths or resolution-based looks and layouts. And then the website itself, when it does call a query or a touch out to the device that's talking to it, it'll say to the device, what is your resolution? What's your browser width? Oh, it's 1024, and it serves up that layout. If it finds that it's a smartphone, it'll serve up a different layout. So there's pros and cons to both of these. Today, though, I'm going to be specifying, and I'm going to be looking specifically at responsive-based web design versus the adaptive, and we'll get into reasons of why that is. From an SEO standpoint, Google recommends responsive web designs because they have a single URL for both desktop and mobile sites, and it makes it easier for Google to discover content, or for Google's algorithms to assign indexing properties to content. I don't think I need to tell anybody that, if this is what Google is dictating, it behooves us not to follow that and not to build to that. To be anything but what Google's looking for at this point is kind of it's extremely short-sighted. So we need to look at this. This is the other reason why in my earlier slide I mentioned about the MDOT site, the whole mobile site. Those actually have separate URLs. So from Google's mind, and this has changed. This has only changed in the last year and a half. They've come back out and said, we've tweaked our algorithms, and now we much prefer a single versus a multiple domain type experience for users. So it should be one web domain that serves up multiple devices versus having separate ones for each. So let's take a look and let's walk through some things to consider when using responsive design. It's time and money. So there's certainly a time and money property here in terms of the investment of both the time and the money to actually take our existing websites and then recreate them or redeploy them in a responsive-based approach. The reality is we have to support the browsers. The number of browsers, as we've gone over, is huge, and it's only going to continue in terms of, particularly not just the browser supports, everything from Internet Explorer all the way to Chrome, Safari, Firefox, the actual browser technologies, but more importantly, the actual resolutions and widths of different browsers. Performance is a huge issue. Some would actually say that responsive adds a lot of overhead to a website in terms of load times and page times, but there are ways in which to optimize that as well. Content is a key. We're going to get into a little bit more detail about content because content strategy also has to change now in the responsive world. And website versus web app. This is a big, big question that we're asked all the time by clients, which is, should we actually, and the third I should have added in here was an actually proprietary app. So a web app would be for those of you who actually will, say, try using LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a really, really well done and executed web interface that almost feels app-like. It does feel app-like in terms of Facebook as well, in terms of when you hit the website with just a browser and the kind of user interface and the experience that you're given. So nowadays, our premise here, at Vigorate is that, we still try to say to our clients and we counsel our clients to probably stay within the website framework in terms of approach things versus creating a web app. But in some cases, when you've got a very specific offering or solution, the idea would be to consider creating a specific website that is a web app. And the third part of this one would be an actual application itself. Many clients will say, well, I just want to create an iPad app, or I just want to create an Android app. That has, and that's for a different discussion, but the amount of investment upfront in both the architecture, the creation, the development of a specific smartphone or iPad or a tablet app, along with the ongoing maintenance and update requirements, generally speaking, unless really required, far outweighs what you would get back in ROI in terms of just taking your existing website and making it responsive. So the key here is to stop thinking in pages and start thinking in systems. This is from Jeremy Keith, a big internet and usability expert. So the key on this one is the traditional way that we always thought, and I think we could only think back 3-4 years ago, was we would think about things in terms of page counts. We talked about how many pages is your website, and you'd be sitting in meetings and discussing the information architecture and the site maps, and everything was based on pages. The problem with pages is they're a finite, fixed way of looking at things. We need to think in terms of systems and in terms of frameworks. So frameworks is a way in which to construct a responsive based website. And there's different ways. You can call them libraries as well. You can actually roll your own or create your own and kind of self-develop your own responsive templates and that. But nowadays, I don't think you really need to do that. Everything from Goldilocks approach to Bootstrap to Foundation to Skeleton, there's some great libraries out there that take a lot of the drudgery of creating your base templates, your overall look and feel, the kind of inherent structures behind things, how a web page will actually break if you're using adaptive or respond if you're using responsive design principles, which allow you then to flow in your graphics, your content, the look and feel without having to create everything from the foundation up. In some of our clients' cases, we have had to do a hybrid of two. We've used a combination of frameworks along with some custom code, in particular when we're hooking into some back-end systems as well. So a couple of things to consider for best practices. First and foremost is content check. So we're going to do more on this in a minute in terms of the content requirements. Start small. This is a big trend right now, which is really, I see it as more of a guidepost. I see it as a way of appreciating where users are. The thought here is that you start first on mobile. So you start and you approach both the creative, the information architecture, your content strategies when you're in the discovery and in the development stage and the creative stage of your website development. And the first browser you think of is not your desktop. You start with your smartphone and your tablet. So you start small and consider, how is this content, how are we going to look on a smartphone first? And then you extrapolate out from that to the desktop. So it's a way of reminding ourselves to take our thinking and switch it 180 degrees. Exit Photoshop, enter browser. For many years now, a lot of design of websites began in Photoshop or Illustrator, and then ultimately were sliced and diced and coded, and then brought into the browser. We need to flip this around. We need to realize that the browser now drives it. It's not a fixed. Photoshop does great, and it does great well with responsive and adaptive, but in particular for fixed sites that you knew that your site was going to be 1024 by 800 pixels. You created a canvas in Photoshop and you started to create within that finite box. Well, nowadays with responsive and the world in which we now live in, it's the browser that determines it. So based on the browser, everything from the widths and everything else, it dictates, which means with fluid and responsive based design principles, our graphics have to change dynamically. They have to be able to be scaled in an infinite number of devices. It's not a fixed look. So one of the principles to remind ourselves is to, once again, we're turning our heads upside down. It's start with the browser and then go to Photoshop. We need to make it modular. This is both to future-proof our websites, but also it's one of the tenets of basic responsive design and adaptive, where you have modules of content and information within your web page that can actually be shifted and moved around based upon the browser. And unfortunately, we always need to be optimizing because best practices are still emerging. Responsive design, in terms of even the coining of the phrase, is only a few years old. A lot of the technologies have only really in the last 6 months to a year, kind of come to maturity. In fact, many of the predictions in 2012 was that 2013 would be the year of responsive design. And I'd have to say that given the number of sites, in fact, we haven't, I don't think, Emily, in the last year, I don't think we've created a non-responsive based website. It's the only type of website, and in fact, going forward, it would be the only type of website we would ever recommend to any of our clients. So content. This is a little different to remind ourselves with content, which is put the important stuff first, but don't forget the rest. So we have to take the pyramid and we have to invert it in terms of traditional ways of creating content. Was you start off with you start with a heading, you start with your introductory, you kind of lay down kind of what you're going to discuss, and then you would get into granular points as you drilled into it. We need to flip that around, and we need, because once again, the content that would display on a desktop, you've got a lot of real estate to deal with. But on a smartphone, it's considerably truncated and small. So you need to get to your major point first. And then as the person is either scrolling or thumbing through it, they will, if it's interesting and if it's a benefit to them, they'll continue to read through it. It shifts. As the screens get smaller, columns become narrower, in particular in responsive designs. So it allows text to become larger and more readable. So, 6 rows becomes 3 rows. It gets hidden. This is the catch with responsive and anything. When you're taking a website and squishing it down to a smartphone, content that would otherwise be too long to skim by scrolling, or it just doesn't fit well in the layout, might get hidden. So nowadays, you'll notice this, in particular with a lot of websites that are responsive based on your smartphone. They're going to use a combination of clicks and buttons and drop-down menus to reveal additional information. Everything from navigational elements to additional content below a headline, and it can get removed. This is an interesting trend that's gone on the last year and a half in terms of content because of the restriction in real estate, visual real estate we have on smartphones. Sometimes the decision can be, we'll just get rid of the content. This is a bit of a catch-22, in particular when you're trying to manage your messaging and brand, and you've got some important things you need to say. We generally do not recommend our clients do this. We generally recommend that we use the devices of clicks and drop-down menus to enable users to control how much content they want to actually reveal to themselves as they're scrolling through our websites. Not an issue when it comes to desktop. It does become more of an issue on tablets, and it's a definite huge consideration on smartphones. So unfortunately for many of us, the amount of overhead and work that we've now taken on is that much more, which does impact both kind of development and kind of investment requirements when you're thinking of taking your website and making it a responsive based site. So here's some pros for responsive web design. Responsive web designs are processed by the client's browser, not your server, which means the browser will be able to determine what kind of layout will best suit itself, and it'll arrange the information accordingly. We've lost control in some respects to how people are viewing our information. We can still claw it back, but it's going to take some effort and some investment on our behalf. Responsive design will soon become the industry standard, and it really is becoming, as hordes of websites have already adopted it, and more will continue to do so. So if you aren't currently, and if your competitors aren't, invariably within the next short few months, if not the next year and a half, your competitors will probably begin to migrate, which will make your site even look that much more out of date. It delivers a consistent experience to your users across all the platforms, and it can critically, it maintains your brand's design philosophy and language, but it's dynamic enough not to be mundane. And it's optimized for the device, so whether it's a tiny screen or a large display, the user can move around your website and read the information easily. Once again, in this case, our consumers are right. We can't necessarily control that. So at the end of the day, it's one for all. It's one web layout for all devices forever. There are cons though, and I think we need to be considerate of it. It's a good responsive web design site. It's not easy to develop. It's not impossible, but it's not easy. It takes a long process to optimize a website for mobile, let alone all the other devices. Fortunately, there are some good tools out there nowadays that helps us in terms of testing and proofing our sites as we're building it. And more best practices are becoming kind of more general and utilized all the time. And our development teams are constantly on it. In fact, when you go down to a developer's desk nowadays, the chances of having a half a dozen handsets from different devices sitting there, it's how it works. And they trade back and forth all the time to test stuff. It is difficult to test a responsive site because there are so many devices to run on it. But once again, there are some good best practices that one can use to ensure the best coverage. And part of that also is to have an understanding of your clients and your ultimate customer and having some information about what kind of devices that they are using to access. In many cases, what we'll suggest to our customers is to take a look at the web logs and take a look at the Google Analytics of your current website to get a sense of how are people currently using and accessing your site and what devices are they using. And then that will give us an indication and a foundation from which then to build the responsive response to. In some cases, some clients, I'm not sure how they can do this, they aren't even running Google Analytics or any kind of analytics package. So in some cases, we will say to a client, you need to integrate this now. You need to set up this, and for the next 3 months, we need to run a series of analytics to determine a baseline. Your web logs from 10 years ago just won't cut it anymore. It does require a skilled set of individuals and a good project manager to develop a responsive website. Not always the easiest thing to find. I'm happy to say here at Vigorate, because of our experience in building multiple versions of different websites, we've got the team that actually has the experience to do that. And it's optimized for the device, so whether it's a tiny screen or a large display, the users can move around your website and read the information easily. So, the reason that's a con is just the effort involved in actually achieving that point. Initially, you may incur some more costs in hiring great talent and managing teams working your website compared to a non-responsive website, but in our estimation, the investment will be well worth the while. And, final thing is responsive design is not the only thing that will please your consumer. We need to remind ourselves that it is a website. It is a critical communications channel for all of us, but it's not the only channel. So it is not the panacea. It is not the solution. It doesn't solve all of our problems. But if what you're running today is a static, fixed website, it's going to certainly go a long way in at least keeping the existing and new clients and new customers, and not pushing them away. But let's not forget about email. And the reason I say that is 77% of customers still prefer to read email offers in their inbox. 44% of email recipients made at least one purchase last year based on a promotional email. Women click 10% more often than men on mobile emails. I did not know that. Did you know that?
I'm a clicker.
Are you a clicker?
I'm
not. I'm going to ask my wife about that one. And 64% of decision makers read their email via mobile devices. The last stat is of critical importance for all of us. The reason for it is because that means that decision maker is reading their email on the device and then, generally speaking, clicking out to a website. So here at Vigorate, we really do promote all of our customers, in particular those that are using our email platform, that the emails that they send out are responsive based and designed. Once again, emails have now been hugely impacted by responsive approaches because of this statistic of almost 2/3 of people are reading emails and reading email offers on their smartphones. But then from that, we need to realize that the benefit of 77% or 44% making a purchase in the last year from promotional email, chances are that then half of those customers are then clicking out to a website. And if that website isn't responsive, then you've kind of lost. And we're back to the earlier stat of 70 plus people leaving websites that have bad usability. So your email needs to be responsive. So unfortunately, it's a kind of a reworking of, for many people and for many businesses, a total architectural kind of review of both the web and all the other digital channels to ensure that we're not alienating our customers. So in conclusion, thank you very much for spending the time with us today. Things to take away from it and to remind ourselves of why responsive design is critical for all of us to consider and invest in the upcoming months and years. First and foremost is device fragmentation. It's here to stay and it's going to continue to go. So we need to ensure that we're not losing customers because they've decided on the device that they're going to access us from. Happy customers. The customer's always right. You need to communicate how and, more importantly, where they dictate, not what we're dictating. The future is responsive. Both the approaches and the technologies are the foundations of the future. I'm not going to get into today's opportunity doesn't really allow us to get into it. There's some really good technical discussions out there right now that the actual code, the way in which the framework of responsive based web design is today, is actually going to prove to be the future of how the web is going to be growing and being developed in the years to come. So by and large, the net is the investment that you'll make in a responsive design site should carry you for a good number of years in terms of being able to tweak it as new devices and new technology trends come, because it is based upon a new approach. And ultimately, for all of us in marketing, is branding and messaging consistency. So responsive principles provide a consistency across multiple devices for a seamless consumer experience, which is critical for all of us nowadays. So thank you very much. Emily, you didn't even interrupt me much. I know I saw some questions popping up on the screen, but
we do have some.
We have questions, and you could have just stopped me.
All right. Well, we'll get to them now.
Okay. Cool.
So thank you so much, Rick. That was a great webinar. And like I said, we did have some questions come in during the webinar, so we'll answer a few of them now. And we don't get to, we will be answering on our Vigorate Digital LinkedIn page. So make sure you check there if you don't hear your question answered right now. Okay, so first off, so how do we know if our site needs to be responsive? So you talked about the cons there, so I think you're just thinking, is it for everyone, and how do we know it's for us?
I'll make the bold statement to say, if it isn't responsive, it needs to be responsive. My sense is, and talking with the guys downstairs in development and everyone, the strategy team, that the future is responsive based. So if your site right now, first and foremost, if your site is Flash, you need to completely rethink any elements and use of Flash within your website. If it's a static kind of fixed site that you haven't reviewed in the last 5 or 6 years, you need to invest in it now, because if you don't, your competitors are going to, which means when the user hits it with their smartphone and your site doesn't render well because of the way it was programmed, the use of Flash, or the fact that it's fixed, as the stats show, and unfortunately stats don't lie, the user will leave, which means you've lost an opportunity, you've lost a sale. So I think that if your site isn't responsive, you need to put it in the planning budgets, and you need to get the development teams, your content teams, and begin to strategize. And once again, we help customers do that. Not all customers that come in, and we help them and we give them guidances in terms of, okay, here's internally what you're going to need in terms of processes, and then here's the investment that you're going to need to make. And in some cases, that investment needs to take 2 or 3 quarters in which to pull together and do. And the other thing I shall add as well is a responsive site just doesn't happen in 2 weeks. You need to take a look at the existing content and the approach that your current site is. And we help our customers kind of migrate from where they are and where they want to go. At the same time, also set in some processes and approaches to ensure future proofing of their site, which is critical as well.
Sure. Just to share a personal experience, here at Vigorate, we have redone our website to be responsive, and we get it from our clients all the time. And I was the same way at the very beginning. As you read all the stats, you decide, yes, responsive is the best move, and you say, okay, do it. So let's just come responsive. And our clients say that all the time. Okay, we've decided we want to go responsive, so can you just do that? But it's a lot of work for the marketer to decide priorities and things like that. So on your website, on your desktop website, you might have a whole bunch of things, and you're hoping that someone sees something that'll stick. But you really have to prioritize when you're going down into mobile. And we had to sit down before we even got around to the developers and decide, okay, we want, promoting our webinars. We want that to be a number one priority, and things like that. So there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done.
Well, no, and actually that's a good point, because what happens, you have to make some tough decisions.
Yeah.
Because when you're on a smartphone, you've only got so many pixels in which to deal with, and you can't say everything. Whereas if you've got a billboard of a desktop, especially 27-inch desktops and everything, you could say whatever you want, basically.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. Next question.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on this briefly, but talking about the investment in time and the investment in developers, someone asked, how much will it cost?
Oh, cost! My goodness, that's a classic question. And my response to that, unfortunately, there is no fixed number. There's no range as well. And the reason for it is because what we're finding is there's a lot of unknowns. We're finding that a lot of websites either have, what happens is a lot of websites, because the web really only kind of, from a marketing and a true communications, really took kind of hold 10, 12, maybe 13 years ago. And for a number of organizations, some were slow to get into it. They may have launched their site 5 or 6 years ago. And what's happened is that their back end business processes have changed. Their customers have changed. And yet the structure of their website, the content of their website hasn't changed. So what we find is, there's a development cost of the site, but there's also the whole internal side of it. And invariably what happens is people begin to look at reviewing their messaging. So, sometimes what I see it as is scope rope. It actually starts to expand into a bunch of areas, which then invariably takes more budget, more time. So what we'll do is when we're working with clients, we'll give you templates, and we try to help them and guide them in terms of understanding of some short, mid, and long-term goals of what we want to do. And once again, if you architect and create the site with those in mind, you can, in essence, put your toe in the water in terms of responsive design. In some cases, what we've done with some customers is we've actually taken a microsite, maybe a sub-brand site that's still separate. It's got a bunch of traditional kind of promotions around it, and we'll use that as a test bed. We'll say to them, listen, you've got a product A site that hangs off the main corporate site. It has its own marketing and everything else. And currently, it's a 25, 30 page website. Let's use that instead of taking on the 200 plus page corporate site. We'll get a bunch of learnings. We'll get the team understanding kind of the nuances of responsive design, and then we'll take on the big kahunga, as a kind of phase 2 approach. And that's a way of people coming to your experience of understanding, because we're rethinking, and invariably it causes our customers to rethink, where does their website fit within the marketing mix, and is it actually being effective, and do we need to increase it? So unfortunately, to give a price, how long is a piece of string?
All right, so we'll just ask one more question here,
sure.
just to be respectful of everyone's time. What are some possible landmines to watch out for?
Oh man, the biggest one is underestimating the effort required and the resources required. Invariably, that's what we're finding. Both from the design standpoint, you have to make sure that one, you've got, if you're going to be doing it internally, you need to have designers and people who actually understand what it means to design for responsive, or in some cases, adaptive based designs. It's a different approach. It's not the traditional way in which websites were designed. The content strategy, you may want to rethink how content and your priorities and your messaging. And then just overall, just testing. People underestimate the effort required to test to ensure that your device or your website is working on at least a couple of dozen different devices to ensure that there's consistency in everything. All of this takes time, and invariably, time usually equals budget.
Yes.
Sorry about that, Em.
All right, so any questions we didn't get answered right now, we will be posting, like I said, on our Vigorate LinkedIn page. So watch out for that. You'll also receive a follow-up email. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Don't forget that our next webinar in the Demonstrate series will take place on September 25th. And for more information about this webinar, you can register for our Demonstrate webinar notifications on our website at vigoratedigital.com. All right, thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.